For Republicans in two crucial swing states of Michigan and Pennsylvania, the 2022 midterms shared several similarities. Each state had intensely divisive primaries, with many fringe candidates who rocketed to the top of their statewide ballots after leaning into election denial conspiracies and their unwavering support for Donald Trump. But when the elections came about, the Republican parties in both states shared something else: defeat. Republicans lost every contested statewide office in Michigan and Pennsylvania and had to hand over control of long-held branches of state legislatures to Democrats. Leaders of said failing party might walk away from that experience with a few lessons learned, ready to gear up for the next election cycle. But this is where Pennsylvania and Michigan's similarities end for now. In Pennsylvania, the GOP is making a visible effort to clean up the chaos 2022 left behind. Republicans implored state party leaders to take a more active role in primaries to make sure they don't end up with another statewide nominee outside of the party's mainstream, like the 2022 gubernatorial nominee and vocal conspiracy theorist Doug Mastriano. Luckily for them, 2022's mainstream candidate still has his eye on the prize. Businessman David McCormick, whose wife served in the Trump administration, narrowly lost the Senate primary to Mehmet Oz after Trump endorsed Oz at the last minute. But McCormick is running for the Senate seat again. And if he makes it past the primary, which is possible, he will face off in the general election against the Democratic Senator Bob Casey, which is still going to be an uphill battle for McCormick. McCormick has managed to rack up endorsements from the state Republican Party and the entirety of the state's congressional delegation. McCormick, who is independently wealthy, raised $5.4 million in campaign funding in his first quarter as a candidate, a sign that Republican donors like his chances. Michigan, on the other hand, is not demonstrating such party unity. Republicans are in the middle of a vicious fight over the potential ouster of the state party chair, Kristina Karamo. Karamo lost her bid for Secretary of State in 2022 after using her campaign to spread the big lie on Donald Trump's behalf and sow distrust in American elections. This tale of two state Republican parties is important because the state of the GOP in these two crucial swing states could directly affect upcoming competitive Senate races and the presidential election. Joining me now, Nick Corasaniti, a reporter for the New York Times covering national politics, voting, and democracy, who's written about the state of Michigan's Republican Party. Also with us is Charlie Dent, former Republican congressman for the state of Pennsylvania. Welcome to both of you. Nick, I didn't know you were in New Hampshire, but that very much looks like our camera in New Hampshire. So good to see you, my friend. I want to start with you because the Pennsylvania story is a little easier to understand for normal folks. The Michigan story is whack.
So I think to understand Michigan, we have to take a couple steps back. So when Donald Trump first came onto the scene and then was successfully elected in 2016, that ushered in a whole new wave of activists at very local levels. We're talking precincts, local wards, and those people became lower-level officials in state parties. So state parties at the very grassroots level began to transform in former President Trump's image. So if we take Michigan, that meant that a lot of people who believed that the 2020 election was stolen now had voting power in conventions to nominate state party officials. So if we fast forward to after the 2022 election, when Michigan Democrats swept to victory, a lot of those activists weren't chastened, they were energized. And they said, we need to double down. So they went and they elected Kristina Karamo, a failed Secretary of State candidate who refused to concede her loss by more than 14 points and is a big proponent of the big lie. So that party then went down this path further, and they have stuck to lies about the 2020 election as like their most important issue. Now that's created divisions, they've lost money, big donors like the DeVosses in Michigan have abandoned the party, and the party is effectively bankrupt. They've had to give up their headquarters that were a long-time big building in Lansing, Michigan. They've had division, and all of those financial difficulties have led to frustrations and divisions even within these activists now. So there has been a vote last month to oust Kristina Karamo by a breakaway faction of the state party. And they actually voted to vote her out. Now, Karamo is saying that was illegitimate. So what we have is a divided party with two people claiming to be chairs, lawsuits filed all over the place, and the party pretty much in chaos.
The irony, of course, is that Kristina Karamo calls votes illegitimate all the time, so I suppose it's on brand for her. Charlie Dent, the distinction in Pennsylvania is that, to Nick's point, these folks, these sort of big lie conspiracy theorists, kind of wrecked the infrastructure of the Michigan Republican Party. That didn't happen in Pennsylvania. There were just some conspiracy theory candidates outside of the mainstream who were running, who might have an easier time of getting Republicans back into the fold in Pennsylvania. Is that a fair take?
Well, I do think the infrastructure of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania took a very serious hit, particularly with Trump denouncing mail-in voting. Republicans are way behind there. But clearly, Pennsylvania is much more united, the Republican Party much more united than Michigan, which is utterly dysfunctional, and it has been. And I think Pennsylvania learned a hard lesson after 2022. I was one of the folks saying at the time, when Doug Mastriano was running for governor, there were probably about 10 to 12 Republicans running for governor, and the state GOP did nothing to condition the field. In other words, they were playing Switzerland. They didn't want to put their thumb on the scale, heaven forbid. But that didn't stop Donald Trump from putting his big backside on the scale. And we got Doug Mastriano and the disaster that followed. This time, the Republican Party is returning to something closer to normalcy by engaging in primaries, trying to condition the field, trying to clear the field for McCormick, which I think they've done fairly successfully. Now, again, what's going to happen in Pennsylvania and Michigan, though, is that the outcomes of these races are probably going to be driven as much by the presidential race as the Republican candidates themselves. So that's the other thing we have to watch. If Trump's the nominee, and he's brought nothing but defeat to Pennsylvania since he was elected in 2016. People are hoping he'll do better. Polls are suggesting that today, but we got a long way between now and November.
All right, guys, stick around. I want to take a quick break. I'm going to come back with Nick Corasaniti and Charlie Dent.